I'm privy to how that process works because, as I mentioned to you at the start, we also provide our platforms to mobile operators who then use that to enable their own subscriber base with feature functionality. So I know exactly how that process works. But I did want to acknowledge Apple for a second. Apple does take a very, very responsible position when it comes to encryption and security and your data. And if I was to single out one organization, I would single Apple out for that very purpose. They've actually even pushed back to a lot, even against the United States government, when called upon to share information that may not necessarily belong to them. So that's a very important point that I did want to make. Again, I'm not taking sides. I'm just pointing out the obvious, which is also recognized and acknowledged by a lot of other people within the industry. Now, continuing on to your comment about quantum, I could not agree with you more with regards to the quantum threat and how real it is. In fact, the Biden administration, on their last day of the last week, they set out an executive order that stated that everybody needs to accelerate and ensure that they are deploying a level of quantum encryption prior to, I think, 2032 or 2035, which, if you really look at it, is not that long ago. I mean, not that far away. And everybody's referring to this as Q Day. Q Day is essentially is the day when quantum computers become available, whether a good party or a bad party, and have the means to start using quantum computing as a means to decrypt your information, right? I compare Q Day to Y2K with a couple of differences, right? Y2K, we knew exactly when that was going to happen. It was going to happen midnight of December 31st, 1999. And we also knew, for the most part, what we had to do to our systems to make sure that the clocks actually continued on past that midnight gong, if you may, right? But in the context of Q Day, we have no idea about one, when it's going to happen, and two, what the impact potentially could be. What we do know is what we need to do to ensure that we are protecting our environments. And that's why deploying systems and platforms that are quantum proof are so important today, because nobody has any idea when Q Day is going to happen. Technology tends to surprise. And I won't be surprised that there would be some state actor that has a lab out there where they're pumping, billions, if not trillions of dollars to be the first one out with a quantum platform. And then you introduce even a bigger problem or a bigger challenge where you talk about quantum AI, which really could go into the scary realm. Again, if you're not doing anything about it. Because as we know, innovation in the AI field is really moving at an amazing pace. And a lot of that is really entirely dependent on the GPU power that you're able to deploy in your environment to push forth your LLMs, etc. Right now, can you imagine a computing environment that makes your GPUs as we know them today irrelevant because they are essentially so powerful? What would that do to the application layer, which is essentially running your LLMs? Right now, how does that evolve, and what could that potentially be? What impact could that potentially have to you? And so that's a next step outcome of quantum computing. But I always tell people, focus on the here and now, and the here and now really is make sure you're not buying into any platform that is not quantum proof and is not quantum ready. And then do a complete review of your internal systems. And, even in the context of government, even if you have legacy systems, there are means to ensure that they are also made quantum proof, right? So make sure once you do an audit of your systems internally and at the periphery, make sure that you are deploying a quantum based strategy. Again, if it's mobile messaging you're concerned about, come talk to us. NetSphere is there today. It's available now. It's being deployed extensively across the globe, and we offer the service globally. So come talk to us, and we'd be happy to talk to you and set you up with a quantum safe communication platform, if you may.
Yeah, to circle back to your comment with Apple, I'm actually a huge Apple fan. I really, unfortunately, like I try to, be like, agnostic or whatever the term is, right, towards technology, try to really like view it with an open mind. But I always go back to like when I was getting my master's, and in one of the classes, is mobile security, where you learn about the security of Android and iPhone, right? And then the lab is you're going to pick a vulnerability, You're going to deploy it, see how far you get on the device, right? I tried for probably 36 hours to get into an iPhone, and I couldn't,
Yeah.
via a Bluetooth vulnerability. It just would not work no matter what I did. And then I go and I switch to an Android, right? And I'm in with root within 30 minutes, right? I'm a terrible hacker. Like, I'm real bad. Like, it's I can fire up Kali Linux, but man, if it's beyond that, we're in a world of hurt over here, right? Android was no problem at all, and it just showed me right there, like, oh, they both parties claim that they care about security, but obviously one actually does. And then you see the things where Apple has completely gone against what the U.S. government wanted, what the European government wanted, right? With getting backdoors into their devices and encryption and everything. And one is it's really eye opening to see a government actively say we want a backdoor into your devices, into your software. Makes me think also that they probably already have one in Android, right? If they're not asking Google or Android for the same thing over there, right? Like, if it was a problem for the government on that platform, they would have said it right when they said it with Apple. And so for Apple to push back the way that they did, and they're just like, hey, you can find me whatever you want. We can go to court. Doesn't matter. I have a whole bank vault full of cash ready to go just for this. Like, doesn't matter. You're not getting your back door. It makes me believe that it's a lot more secure by default than any other device platform out there. I'm not trying to like put it up against Netsphere or anything like that, but I'm totally on board with your comments with Apple. It's like, we're also going into uncharted territory, right? Like, we've never seen this convergence of AI and quantum. Both areas have been around, since like the 80s or the 70s, right? Like, I had on someone from NVIDIA talking about, you could argue, AI in its most crudest terms and form was around in the 50s even. And which is interesting to hear him describe that, right? But we've never really been in a situation with both industries where they're at such a inflection point, right? Where it's like, if wait a minute, this AI over here is doing all these different things, right? And AI is different from an LLM, but I think LLMs kind of shed light on the capabilities and the potential of AI, right? Like, they're so very closely linked that really only nerds like myself and you would actually be able to say, well, an LLM isn't quite an AI, right? Based on whatever, right? But for most people, for 95% of the people, if I go ask my wife, she's going to say, hey, ChatGPT is an AI, right? Like, that's what it is. So it's getting more visibility, more attention than ever. And we're also at this inflection point where the technology for quantum and AI are like catching up to what everyone has been saying for decades. That's what everyone's been warning about. And now we're in a situation where literally, like, I'm hoping my iPhone, they're preparing something in the background, right, for iPhone 20 or whatever it might be, to have post quantum encryption capabilities, right? Because this device that I rely on pretty heavily, that I mean, it would take such a significant event for me to get off of an Apple device at this point, that like, it's like, guys, I'm hoping you're preparing like everyone else is saying. And to your point too, with the Biden administration, I think they actually moved up the date to, I think it was 2035, and I think they moved it up to like 2028 or something like that. Like, they, I mean, that's how dire the situation really is, because now everyone, when the government changes the timeline like that, that they probably have some, genius in a basement somewhere that already accomplished it. And they're like, the genie's out of the bottle in this room. We can't keep it in this room for that long. It's
Exactly.
going to escape at some point.
But on behalf of the government's case, to a certain extent, I understand the need of a backdoor from their perspective, because they're also tasked with keeping their citizens safe, right? Whoever the government entity is. I think the challenge comes about when within the government, the checks and balances fail. And guess what?